Tell me about your relationship with Barney Barnett. How did you know Barney?
I first met Mr. Barnett. I was with the 333rd Bomb Group, Dalhart, Texas. At that time, Mr. Barnett was living in Mosquera, New Mexico. I met him in late 1943. I was on a bomb drive for the squadron commander out of Dalhart, Texas.
So you both were in the service together?
Oh, we were not in the service together. He was a civilian working with as a civil engineer at the state of New Mexico.
And what kind of relationship did the two of you have?
Well, Barney didn't have any children. He'd raised a niece. He sort of took me under his thumb. And during the visits, he treated me just about like a son.
So, pretty close relationship.
Real close relationship.
I understand around 1950 he told you a story about something that had happened sometime previous. Can you relate that story to us?
Yes. Mr. Barnett told me that when he was coming back from one of his field trips, he'd run onto a flying saucer that had burst open, and there were 4 beings on the ground. And that he was surveying the site, and about that time an archaeological group from the University of Pennsylvania come on the site. There were about 4 or 5 people with this group. As they were just starting to look things over fairly closely, the military moved in and gave them a briefing to not say anything about it and to keep quiet, and that it was in the national interest that they get out of there.
What was his feeling about what it was that he had experienced?
He had no qualms about what it was. He said the vehicle from outer space, without any question. The beings on there were not exactly like human beings. Similar, but not exactly.
How did he describe them?
He described them being about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, very slim in stature, and with their heads were hairless, with no eyebrows, no eyelashes, no hair, and sort of a pear-shaped head, with the top of the head being smaller, or larger.
Any other characteristics about their appearance?
Only one thing that he mentioned is the hands were not covered. They had 4 fingers.
How were they dressed?
They were dressed in some type of a tight-fitting suit. It looked like sort of a metallic, but not metal and not nylon. And it fit to the body very closely tight. But they were not wearing any headpiece at all. And I don't recall that he said anything about what they had on their feet. They were all dead and only a short distance from the craft. The craft burst open, and he said that they hadn't seen anybody inside, but they really hadn't had a chance to look. These were all outside the craft, and quite close to the craft, within not too many feet from the object.
How did he describe the craft?
Typical flying saucer.
Disc-shaped?
Disc-shaped, and of pretty good size, not small. It was a craft that probably could have carried quite a few beings. It wasn't one of the little small discs at 3/4 and next place. It's probably 100 feet. Big.
Really? How did he describe the impact site, if at all?
He said it had come to rest sort of on not a high bank, but sort of a ridge or a bank, and had hit against the bank. It had split there. But otherwise, it was intact.
Did he describe any other debris or wreckage besides?
There was no, according to him, there was no wreckage or debris around his craft.
But did he give any description about the archaeology team?
Nothing, except there was 4 or 5 people. They were obviously there for a dig, and they had just come upon us just about nearly simultaneously. He just arrived there, and here they came.
Any names of any of these individuals?
He didn't have any names, because the short period that they were there, and by the time the Army rounded them up and told him to get out of there after they'd briefed him what not to say and so on, he got his pickup and headed back for his office.
Did he ever tell this story to anybody else?
He went back to his office, and his boss, he started to tell him, and the boss told him, "Barney, don't tell me anything about it. I don't want to hear about it. Just forget it." And he says, when I was told that, he said, having been told not to say anything, he said, and I'm not going to have people think I'm crazy. So I never told anybody else until the time he told me about it.
What kind of man was Barney Barnett?
Barney Barnett was a real private individual. He didn't smoke, he didn't drink. His family and himself were very private. He associated with people, but not too much on a social basis. But he was very reliable, professional man, lived a lot in the outdoors, and knew the outdoors. We had a lot of time together because way out there in New Mexico, when you're driving around, there's miles and miles and miles, there's nothing. So we had a lot of time to talk. But in all the time I knew Barney, he never told me a story. I was never told any story of any kind about anything. So I believed anything that he would say was reliable. I could have had a lot more information, but I didn't pump him for information. At that time, I was raising a family and busy in the military, and 15 things to do. And I could have got a lot more information from him, I'm sure. But it was one of those things that you think back, we hadn't had anybody in outer space. We hadn't had anybody in the moon. If we had progressed with this sort of thing, I might have been a little bit more interested in details.
When he related this account, what did you think about the story?
I had no doubts about it. Knowing his reliability, I had no doubts, but it was real. And of course, he said that he was sworn to secrecy. I was still in the Air Force, so I didn't go around blabbing this to everybody.
Have you experienced any repercussions from having shared this?
None. I haven't had anybody harass me. Everybody that watched Unsolved Mysteries, I've had nothing but good comments. Most people believe these actually exist. And I don't really believe that I've had one bad comment. However, they intentionally didn't give your address. But I had calls from every province in Canada except the eastern ones, from Florida, Texas. And the amount of people that seen this, I was amazed.
So you don't have any regrets about having divulged this?
I have no regrets about it. As a matter of fact, I could tell the same story 1,000 times without changing it, because I know it to be actual facts. I'm not about to alter anything. And I wouldn't accept one penny or one dime to make any statement, because that would ruin the validity of what Mr. Barnett did. In respect to him, I wouldn't do it.
As a former military man, what do you think our government should do now that this story is out?
I can't see any reason why whatever information they have is not released. I think any information or documents should be released, because most of the public believes they exist anyhow. And I think the population now is better prepared to accept this sort of thing than they would have been in 1947, right after World War II. There were probably reasons why they didn't want it released. I can't see any reason for not releasing. The only time that I had any occasion to possibly see a flying saucer, in 1940, I was with the 7th Bomb Group, 11th Bomb Squadron. We'd moved off the coast because of the problems with an imminent war. So we'd moved into Salt Lake City, and we were working out of the municipal airport out there. And just about it was between 12 and 1 o'clock. There was a disc-like object had come over Salt Lake City. It come from the east over the Wasatch Mountains. In the daytime, it looked like the moon does if you see it in the daytime. And there was 2 pilots that I knew out there. I can't recall their names. And myself up there. And we run for B-17. And we immediately started, didn't run the proper checks in other rooms. Taxied right out to the runway and took off. And we chased this. I mean, there was no hope. It was just distances. And it could not possibly have been another airplane or balloon, because the B-17 was about as fast a thing as there was on the market at that time. It come over from the east, went right directly over the airfield, and then it went west, and when we took off, then it just about went at a real steep angle going to the northwest, went up. It kept getting smaller and smaller till it was just like a little dot up there. And nothing that I know of could possibly climb that fast.
And this was what year?
1940. And because I went overseas in 1941. I was in Hawaii on 1st December 1940. I was quite familiar with airplanes. I'd always had an interest in aviation, and I went into the Air Corps. So I have an idea what they would do and could recognize the difference between something like that.
A little bit about yourself. Where are you living now, and what's been your profession over the past few years?
Well, at present, I and my wife reside in Southern California in a small community called Spring Valley. It's in the neighborhood of San Diego. I think for our purposes that's close enough. And I practiced as a dentist in that region from about 1952, after my release from active duty after following the Korean police action. I think that's correctly noted.
Right.
And I met Pappy Henderson in the early mid-60s. To the best of my recollection, it had been maybe 1962 or 63.
How did you happen to meet him or know him?
Well, I was introduced to him by a mutual friend. And we were, of course, one of my other vocations other than dentistry has been practice of studying metallurgy. And I think that's probably what got Pappy and I together. And as the years went along, I went into other ventures. I wound up actually joining one of his because it really proved to be interesting. We gained a great deal of respect for each other, and I trusted his judgment as he did mine, I guess. Just was a very nice relationship that we developed.
And when did he tell you about something that occurred that was very unusual in 1947?
Well, it was, as near as I am able to tell, it would have been, and I think it might have been perhaps the 30th anniversary of that event. Because it was right about that time, in the summer of 1978.
Okay. And what was it that he related to you as to what had occurred?
Well, and he, of course, we will understand, we were in a public place where we met frequently, but we did speak in quite in a great deal of privacy, let's say. And he told me about the Roswell incident. When that incident occurred, why, I happened to have been in a period of inactive duty in my naval service, and I was living in northern Minnesota. And I guess the wire service never reached me. I was actually unaware of the Roswell incident. It was casually mentioned in our newspapers, perhaps as late as a month later. Who knows? But northern Minnesotans weren't too worried about what happened in Mexico.
So what did Pappy Henderson tell you happened?
But he said that he had an unusual job to perform while he's in his Air Force service. And, that he transported wreckage and bodies of the alien people to Ohio. It was that simple. And Jack was a man of few words, really. And in our habit, the way we dealt and talked with each other, we really didn't waste much time. We said it, and that's it. There's nothing more to it.
Did he describe any of the wreckage to you?
Not really at that time. It was just a smashed pile of, I guess, space wreckage, spacecraft garbage, and I guess some of the passengers thereon suffered their death, of course. I really was more or less privileged to just be listening, so I refrained from asking a lot of questions. But he did say that these people were small, and that there were quite a number of them. He never described the actual number to me, but since I've, of course, been filled in somewhat, I'm still not sure that there were what they even claim now. There may have been a lot more.
Did he describe their appearance any further than saying they were small?
Not to me. I think he found the kind of distasteful. I was pretty well tuned into Jack's feelings, you know. And if something was bothering him, I'd be sort of aware of it.
Did he say what his takeoff point was?
Well, I assumed it was Roswell. He did not say to me where it was from.
But that he did say that he was going to Wright-Patterson.
Yeah, that's where he did say, and he said that the remains were there. And he said very likely in a frozen state. Which would lead me to believe that, that being the case, that autopsy work was being planned. Would have undoubtedly been performed. So it was perhaps a year later. We were meeting again under about the same circumstances. We decided to have a game of pool, and when we had a little break in our game, he produced this piece of metal for me to look at. He said, "What do I think of it?" I said, "Well, it's different." And I felt it, and it did feel different. And I studied it some. I was able to determine that its metal structure was different than alloys like we have in our aircraft, for instance. And of course, he did preface his question by stating this was from this craft. Apparently, I think it was a case of appropriation that he acquired this, you know, for future study, perhaps. At any rate, I gave it a good, thorough looking at and decided that it was an alloy that we are not used to, or we don't think we do. But there is a possibility we may be able to come up with something like it.
What do you...
It's a very big, roundabout statement.
I understand. How about describing it for me? What did it look like, feel like?
Well, it was a lustrous, a gray lustrous metal that resembled aluminum. It was lighter in weight and much stiffer. If you're familiar with aluminum alloys like ST-37, it's a very stiff, tough aluminum. Well, this was harder and stiffer than that.
Could you bend it?
No, not, and I didn't want to try. The edges were pretty sharp, and Jack didn't want to let it out of his personal ownership, you know. So I couldn't take it into my lab and do some testing on it, which I really would like to. Number one, I'd like to have found out what it would take to machine it. In other words, in machinist language, to mill it. But I think this is one of the reasons that Jack showed me this piece, because our association had gone on quite a few years, and he trusted me. And I didn't tell anybody about it. I think this is my first discussion, or the meeting as of this date.
Publicly.
So
What did he do with this piece of metal?
he put it in his pocket, and that's the last I've seen of it. It's probably in his personal effects somewhere. His wife states that there's many boxes of his things that she has gone through or opened or looked at. So could be that that piece is there, and I'd certainly recognize it if it were. My feeling was that the metal itself was it didn't have a crystal lattice structure like alloys that we make. It was more of an amorphous form, and that the fractures of the edges were more like fractures rather than tears. As I recall, they had a conchoidal appearance, like plate glass or bottle glass, for instance, would have if you break it. Smooth, concave shapes with real sharp edges.
What's significant about that? Anything?
Well, it indicates that it's not crystalline, which may have a lot to do with its physical properties, perhaps in flight or resistance to heat. I know we're using non-metallic materials like steatite to cool our shuttles with and so on to absorb the heat. This apparently didn't need that.
Would with your background, your knowledge of metallurgy, would you think that this was something that would have been easily manufactured using technology available at the time you saw this material?
Well, I don't think it'd been easy for us to do. No.
What is your own belief about what this fragment was from? What did it represent?
Well, I think it was one of the structural parts, not the thinner materials. I know that Jack himself, well, he stated to me, as far as the thin materials go, that was the lining of the craft, and that when properly energized, it produced perfect illumination inside. That you had a total easy light with no shadows. That's why I asked today this gentleman that I think it was Jesse that had his hands on some of that thin material if he had seen it in the dark.
Right.
I guess he hadn't or hadn't paid any attention to it. He's pretty young then anyway. Well, that would be kind of interesting to see if it could be energized or polarized, maybe is all it would need to be. It's hard to say. Take a little, take a good old scientist, maybe one of our physicist friends who could tackle that and light the place up with a piece of that, you know. It's barely possible. So.
What do you think this was from, though? I mean, what was this?
I think
this
that
thing was recovered.
Yeah, well, I think that metal, that thin material, was different. I didn't see any of it, but from what I've seen of the pictures and so on, I don't think that's the same metal.
Is it your feeling that this was from an extraterrestrial spacecraft?
Oh yes. Well, there's no question in my mind about that. I have no question but what it was from outer space.
The bodies?
Sure. Well, there's no reason we don't have a franchise on Universe.
Yeah.
If you're interested in my thinking on that matter, why, I don't think we have a franchise on being the only good guys and or bad guys either, for that matter, in the universe.
Obviously, this was something that was considered to be highly secret. Pappy Henderson wouldn't have shared this with you without a foundation of trust.
Right. Well, he asked me to observe the protocol to not mention it, which I didn't. I was kind of surprised to find that he'd taken a couple other people into his confidence, but one of which was Bill, who's here today. Also, there is another one that we discovered This is one of our naval helicopter pilots who's retired now. And was aware of what Pappy had seen. He was pretty choosy about who he talked to, I think.
As far as this metal fragment's concerned, do you have any idea where it is now, today?
No, I don't. I think if it's anywhere, it'd be in his personal effects. And I think, as Sappho said, if it's anywhere, it's in some of the old boxes they haven't even opened yet. So I'm going to look into that when I return. See if I can maybe convince her to go ahead.
We'd very much like to know what the result of that is.
Well, if I get it, it'll head right straight for my safety deposit box, and then I'll get on the telephone. And I won't tell them which bank it's in. They'll have to kidnap me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Crumshaw. I
Well,
appreciate
you're
it.
very welcome. I'm hopeful that I've strengthened your thinking in some ways.
It's certainly been illuminating.
Well, if I find that metal, I'll send it back here